A bronze gear surfaces from a forgotten shipwreck, teeth aligned like a silent calendar. In the high Andes, granite carries grooves so straight they feel machined rather than carved. In a quiet case, a glassy disc from Assyria holds a precise glint, polished beyond mere ornament. Across a desert, lines run for miles, truer than the horizon, visible only when you rise above the earth. We are told these are curiosity's skill, patience, and communal will. We are told progress is a staircase, one careful rise at a time. What if the staircase is a broken bridge, its missing spans covered by sand and certainty? What if the artifacts we call anomalies are survivors from older toolkits, fragments of a language we forgot to speak? The orthodox view insists on incremental craft, soft metals coaxing hard stone, rituals stamping meaning into ground, knowledge accreting grain by grain. The counterview observes pattern tolerances, repeatable feed rates, optical intent, and survey logic etched into landscape. Between them lies the path we will walk, respect for scholarship, appreciation for anomalies, and discipline to weigh both. This is not a leap into fantasy. It is a wager that human intelligence has worn many masks, some familiar, some lost. Machines may be hiding in stone. Systems may be breathing beneath ruins. Knowledge may be cached in pigments, alloys, and knots. Our task is simple only in words: follow function, test manufacture, and recover context. When uncertainty opens, we will not fill it with noise. We will measure, compare, and admit what we do not know. If you feel the old story loosening, hold that thread. We will pull it carefully, not to unravel history, but to reveal the weave beneath it. Because without clear terms, mystery outruns evidence, certainty calcifies, and nuance dies. All are enemies of honest discovery and learning. Walk with us at that edge where doubt steadies the hand and curiosity keeps the light from dimming. Stay sharp. Next, before we go further, we set our rules: how to see, how to doubt, and how to keep wonder honest. This journey needs rules, or wonder will run ahead of evidence. We will move site by site, notching case studies like markers on a trail. At each stop, we will place mainstream research on one plate, anomalies on the other, and watch the balance. Our promise is simple: no sensational shortcuts, no cynical shrugs. We will ask hard questions kindly and keep curiosity tethered to proof. To do that, we'll use 3 lenses. First, function. What did it do, reliably, for real people? We will privilege repeatable use over poetic metaphor. Second, manufacture. What tools, materials, tolerances, and labor could actually produce it? If a method leaves a signature, we'll look for it. Third, context. Why here? Why then? And who would benefit? Artifacts without context tempt fantasy. Context without artifacts tempts dogma. We want both. There are pitfalls we must name. Confirmation bias loves shiny outliers. Pseudo-history stitches gaps with grand narratives. Yet skepticism can fossilize into its own superstition, dismissing the uncomfortable because it is uncomfortable. We will let data unsettle us, and we will let replication steady us. When experts disagree, we'll map the disagreement honestly and show what would change our minds. Our methods favor clarity. Primary sources outrank retellings. Measurements outrank vibes. Craft reconstruction, when possible, outranks armchair theorizing. Chain of custody matters. So do weathering, tool marks, and regional traditions. We will keep a control group, ordinary stones, ordinary pots, to know when extraordinary actually means uncommon, not impossible. We will consider failure modes because machines, ancient or modern, fail in patterned ways. Boundaries keep us honest. We are not invoking aliens, time travelers, or powers that cancel physics. We are testing human ingenuity pressed against materials, climate, and politics. If a result demands the impossible, we will say so. If a humble explanation fits the data, we will prefer it without letting modesty erase wonder. The emotional arc is set: curiosity to open the door, confrontation to test our courage, humility to light the exit. Pack these lenses, keep your balance. First stop the places where stone behaves like metal. Bring patience, sharpen your sight. Sunlight skims the limestone at Giza and turns an old controversy into a blade. Along a surviving casing stone, the beam holds steady across a plane so true it feels engineered rather than merely smoothed. At Sacsayhuamán above Cusco, blocks the size of buses clasp like fingers, serpentine seams curving yet meeting with improbable intimacy. In the Bolivian Altiplano, Pumapunku's interlocking forms, especially the H-blocks, fix the eye to corners that arrest at 90 degrees. Try slipping a leaf, it snags. What we're told: patience, copper chisels, dolerite pounders, sand as liquid file, water for lubrication, genius-level organization, and time, oceans of time. Ramps rise, sledges crawl, teams coordinate. Experimenters prove that stone obeys when you persist. The orthodox ledger is not wrong. Abrasion can polish, pecking can true a surface, and excellence can march by inches. What we find: signatures that resemble saw feed, concentric drill striations, right angles repeating across blocks quarried miles apart, and tolerances implying gauging rather than guessing. The mystery is not whether humans could work stone. It's the repeatability, an almost industrial sameness that hints at standardized procedures, jigs, or measuring systems robust enough to survive weather, quarries, and crews. Logistics whisper their own story. Moving multi-ton monoliths across uneven grades demands planning like a supply chain. Quarry selection, pre-shaping to reduce waste, transport synchronized with seasons, staging yards acting as open-air factories. Picture quality control under the sky, rejects set aside, prototypes tested, grooves revised. When the sun drops, edges announce themselves, a straight line catching dusk in one breath, a corner refusing to wander, a joint where darkness cannot settle. Skill or machinery? It's a false duel if machinery only means bronze gears. A jig is a machine, a template is a machine, a water-charged sandsaw is a machine. Perhaps the secret is less a hidden device than a system. Repeatable workflows encoding knowledge the way a song encodes steps, teaching hands to find the same perfection twice. If walls can masquerade as machines, what about artifacts that are machines? Next, we turn from walls to devices that calculate the heavens. The closer you look, the louder stone speaks. On granite faces, spiral striations wind inward like the grooves of an ancient record, each ridge a hint of rotation and pressure. In museum drawers, tubular cores show helical scoring and abrupt step changes, as if a bit advanced or stalled. Elsewhere, chisel chatter ripples across surfaces in scallops, a drummer's roll frozen in quartz. Every method of shaping, pecking, pounding, sawing, drilling, polishing writes a signature. The problem is translation. Field archaeologists warn that signatures are dialects, not alphabets. Grain size, moisture, tool hardness, and posture can produce lookalikes. A copper tube with abrasive slurry can mimic a steel crown bit. A string saw charged with sand can imitate a thin blade. Repeated training can stabilize motion until human hands behave like a jig. Technologists counter with metrics. Uniform feed rates leave regular spacings between ridges. Concentric scoring implies axial stability. Parallelism over distance suggests guided motion. When measurements reveal periodicity, they see process control, not happenstance. They test with profilometers, align lasers along edges, and model torque loads to decide which explanations remain plausible. Sometimes numbers argue for tooling more rigid than the received picture allows. Both views matter because attribution is notoriously slippery. Repairs overlay originals, Later quarrying cannibalizes earlier blocks. Weather exaggerates some marks and erases others. Fallen pieces flip, hiding the working face while exposing a surface that misleads. Photographs conspire, compressing 3 dimensions into 2 and turning shadows into phantom grooves. Here's a productive middle path: hybrid methods. Ancient workshops could combine abrasive slurries, wood or copper guides, and water-assisted sawing to make surfaces seem machine-like without iron or electricity. Templates might enforce angles, plumb bobs and chord grids might police line. Drills could be human-powered, stabilized by mass and flywheels. The result is stonework with repeatability bordering on industrial, born from choreography rather than secret alloys. Nuance does not dull the wonder, it sharpens it. The more closely we read the tool marks, the more deliberate the choices appear and the disciplined minds behind them. Then a shipwreck off Antikythera quietly pulled a gear train from myth into metal. A sponge diver surfaced, coughing brine, and the crew hauled up what looked like corroded rock. Inside that rough shell waited teeth, bronze gears meshed like thought-made metal. As conservators teased the concretion apart, inscriptions emerged in Greek and dials appeared layered like a pocket universe. What lay on the work table was not legend but mechanism, a machine for knowing time in the language of the heavens. Turn the surviving crank and the cosmos advances. Pointers crawl across scales that marry calendars to constellations. The metonic cycle tallies 19-year rhythms. The Saros dial forecasts eclipses, those throat catches. Differential gearing reconciles lunar anomaly, cheating perfect circles to follow the moon's uneven pace. It is prediction, not prayer, astronomy embodied in brass. The consensus holds: Hellenistic craftsmen somewhere between Rhodes and Alexandria, at the pinnacle of Greek engineering. Rare, yes; impossible, no. But then comes the ache behind the awe. Where are the training wheels and the grandchildren? Where are the cruder ancestors, the scattered workshops, the manuals stained by oil and weather? A device this coherent implies a design culture, tolerances decided, tooth counts standardized, layout conventions taught and debated. Mechanism implies tradition. Standards live in tooth counts, dial layouts, and calibration conventions shared openly. Consider its precision. Tooth edges are regular. The clearance is tight enough to preserve phase over years. The dial inscriptions read like a user interface, field-tested and revised. Even broken, it speaks systems, bill of materials, assembly order, calibration ritual. We are not looking at a tinker's lucky accident, but a product from a place that could prototype, iterate, and deliver. What we're told is that the sea kept the rest. Shipwrecks do not file paperwork, yet the silence leaves a pressure in the chest as if a workshop door closed behind us forever. If this survived by chance, what disappeared by routine loss? Reverence is the only honest posture, and questions the only faithful prayer. Because once you meet a clock before clocks, you start seeing instruments hiding in plainer clothing, pretending to be ritual, toy, or trinket until someone quietly asks them to measure. In another age, a bronze vessel shaped like a regal jar sat in a hall and waited. Along its rim, dragon heads held pearls. One fell whenever distant ground convulsed. This is the Han Dynasty seismoscope attributed to Zhang Heng. Not a myth of divination, but a hypothesis of sensitivity, mass, latch, and directionality, translating tremor into signal. Mainstream voices caution that reconstructions vary. Some trigger too easily, others not at all. Yet the concept remains compelling. An early instrument tuned. Records report directions, a feat modern tests struggle to match. Across centuries and deserts, a small piece of rock crystal from Nimrud catches the light. It is polished into a lens-like oval capable of magnification if held at the proper distance. Was it a jeweler's aid, a ritual bauble, or an optical tool misfiled as trinket. Conservative readings favor decoration or inlay. The mystery lens asks a ruder question: if it enlarges reliably, why assume it never did? Then there are the Roman dodecahedra, hollow bronze, 12 faces with circular apertures and nubs that fit fingers like memory. Hundreds have been found, but never with instructions. Proposed uses multiply: candlestick, glove sizer, knitting spool, gaming piece, or surveying gauge that pairs two holes to lock a field of view at fixed distance. Archaeology leans toward practical or ceremonial functions. Craftsmen who handle replicas discover repeatable alignments, suggesting a portable standard disguised. Pattern, not proclamation, is the point. A seismoscope that reports direction, a lens that multiplies sight, a polyhedral frame that fixes proportion. 3 small devices with one temperament: measurement. They standardize, align, amplify. They move experience from impression to countable effect. What we're told is prudence without explicit context. Do not oversell. What we find is convergent utility hiding behind beauty and enigma. Tiny instruments remake hands, steadier, surer, more ambitious. And when hands change, architecture follows. These are not clocks, but they keep time with the world in other ways. Earth wave, focal length, ratio. Etudes before symphonies, they hint at workshops that treated reality as tunable and responsive. Some artifacts hint not just at measurement, but at power. A clay jar, a copper cylinder, an iron rod. Nothing about the trio screams electricity until an acidic solution meets metal and a needle quivers on a meter. Replicas running lemon juice or vinegar produce a faint voltage, enough to tickle the skin and plate a whisper of metal if given time. The object itself, bitumen-sealed, narrow-necked, could have housed wine, scrolls, or anything small and precious. The question is not, can it make current, but was that the intent? What we're told, it's likely a simple storage vessel whose parts commingled after centuries. Electroplating claims ride ahead of evidence. Residues are ambiguous. No wires, switches, or banks of cells have been found. Responsible caution advises that one jar does not a laboratory make. Without a clear workshop context, electricity becomes the loudest story in a quiet room. What we find: chemical plausibility that refuses to sit down, scattered traces of gilding and plating in other ancient objects, and the stark fact that tiny current is still current. In a dim room, a craftsperson could discover effects by accident: shock from sour wine in contact with a copper probe, or a shimmer of deposited metal in a cup left overnight. Tinkering doesn't begin with theory. It begins with curiosity, mess, and repetition. Imagine a bench stained by acids, copper sheets cut into tubes, rods repolished after each trial. With a handful of jars linked in series, tenacious artisans could speed a thin plate or etch a pattern. The yields would be small, the process temperamental, the knowledge easily siloed within guild walls. A lost routine can look like myth when only the jar survives. Skepticism still serves us. Extraordinary claims need ordinary paperwork, tools in situ, residues consistent with electrolytes, notes scratched on clay. Until then, the battery remains a possibility, neither trophy nor hoax, but a question with leads. Even a spark can change a workshop's horizon. If minimal voltage could gild a bead or etch a seal, what larger systems might channel forces invisibly? From sparks of current, we turn to architectures that move air, water, and people. At Nan Madol, the city rises on water as if balanced on an unseen grid. Basalt prisms, quarried as if nature had cast them into logs, are stacked into walls that ride the tides. Canals thread between platforms like streets for canoes. The pattern hints at surveying in 3 dimensions: bearing, tide, and load. Stones align in courses of repeating thickness, modules you can count with your palm. When one section settles, another compensates. Collapse is local, never total. That is what feedback looks like in stone. High in the Andes, the Inca stitched mountains with a road network that ignores our definition of impossible. Switchbacks respect slope angles. Causeways cross wetlands on packed foundations. Suspension bridges braid fiber into span and redundancy. Every so many kilometers, a tambu appears, way station, storehouse, checkpoint calibrated to a day's march. Distances are not guessed, they are rationed. The network is a logistics machine disguised as a pilgrimage, marrying labor, taxation, and time. Across valleys, aqueducts step down in arcs so persistent they feel like handwriting. Survey crews solved gradients to keep water moving without tearing itself apart. Outfalls drop into settling tanks. Inspection shafts punctuate the run. Spillways bleed pressure before trouble finds it. You can read the design loop in sequence: survey, trial run, adjustment, standardization, then scale. Textbooks call this trial and error. The record looks more like pipeline, designed to prototype to scale, governed by rules carried in memory, song, and staff orders. Standard modules let distant crews build as if guided by the same invisible hand. Maintenance regimes close the loop. Way stations store spare parts, food, and directives. Once encoded, the system remembers itself even when leaders change. We tend to celebrate the mystery of single artifacts. Here the mystery is administrative. Algorithms performed by people repeated until habit turns into infrastructure. The grand vision is not a ruler's whim. It is a culture's operating system. And beneath many of these structures sits a material that behaves like a living thing, healing cracks and enduring salt and time. The road leads next to a chemistry lesson that refuses to die. Roman concrete endures because it behaves less like a rock and more like a colony. Inside its matrix, unreacted lime nodules wait like seeds. When cracks admit water, those pockets dissolve, migrate, and recrystallize as mineral stitches that close the wound. Along seawalls, volcanic ash meets salt water and grows needle-like crystals that interlock across time. Modern mixes chase strength on day 28. Theirs plays the long game, trading early numbers for chemistry that learns. Egyptian blue looks modest in a jar and supernatural under light. Ground to fine powder, it glows beyond human vision, releasing near-infrared like a stored whisper. That response comes from an engineered lattice, copper nested in a silicate framework that traps and frees energy with repeatable grace. Pigment becomes instrument, stable, durable, obedient to heat and time. Imagine friezes that read as color by day and as silent beacons by flame, a material that remembers light and answers on cue. A recipe becomes a device. Across the ocean, latex met the sap of morning glory vines and learned to bounce. Mesoamerican makers needed ratios for purpose, springier blends for game balls that could sing off stone, tougher mixes for sandals and bindings, tackier brews for glues that defy rain. Crosslinks formed where plant chemistry invited them, a low-temperature cousin of later vulcanization. These composites were not accidents. They were families tuned like instruments for specific work. What we're told is safe. Empirical recipes discovered by patient hands improved slowly. What we find feels like research culture, hypothesis, iteration, quality control, and knowledge guarded in guilds. Microstructure is the quiet protagonist. Crystals that grow on schedule, lattices that emit on cue, polymers that learn discipline. Systems thinking lives in the kiln and the mixing vat as in roads and aqueducts. Perhaps manuals once listed proportions, firing curves and curing prayers. Perhaps they burned or were sung and never written. The materials still speak through performance. If minds could make stone self-mend, pigment radiate, and rubber remember, we must widen technology to include time itself. If they could engineer stone and mixtures, could they map the world from the sky? Some maps feel older than their ink. Early composites gather coasts from sailors who never met, stitching rumor to measurement until shorelines harden into confidence. In certain stretches, headlands and bays appear with unnerving poise, as if copied from a master drawing no one preserved. Historians sensibly credit collation, pilots' rudders, sounding lists, bearings, and distances averaged in chart houses where salt still dried on the benches. The orthodox tale is a triumph of patience, data accreted, copied, corrected, then copied again. Portolan charts look like the proof of that method. Wind roses bloom across the vellum. Rum lines radiate like spider silk, letting captains steer by constant bearing. With magnetic compasses, dead reckoning, and coastal sightings. Mariners kept direction well enough to redraw what mattered: ports, shoals, angles between capes. The grid is practical rather than theoretical, a tool born from practice more than from geometry. Yet a stubborn impression lingers. Why do some coastlines lock so neatly while interiors dissolve into myth? Why do clusters of charts replicate the same systematic offsets, as if copying a common ancestor they could sense but not see? The mystery lens suggests a deeper data pool, fragments saved through shipwrecks of history, recopied after fires, folded into new work without citation. Not satellites, not Atlantean plotters, but the quieter miracle of information technology before printing. Recording, averaging, and recombining. Think of the workshop as an algorithm. Each voyage writes a line of code: bearings, tacks, leagues, landmarks. Chart makers read, weigh, and update the model. Errors propagate like rumors until a better witness overwrites them. Over centuries, a living palimpsest emerges, coasts tallied by consensus reality at sea. Where the record thins, fantasy floods the blank with lions. Where it thickens, outline becomes law. We inherit the ghost without its library, yet the technique endures. Iterate, compare, converge. These maps remember more than they show, and they hint that knowledge can survive collapse if its fragments remain useful. From maps that act like memory, we turn next to metals that behave like magic. Their precision whispers training, archives, and disciplined, long-lived coastal science. A patterned blade is not merely sharp, it is a memory of heat given a shape. Wootz crucibles turned iron and carbon into ingots veined like watered silk, the pattern emerging when the steel was coaxed, not bullied. Smiths spoke in temperatures their eyes could read: straw, brown, purple, blue. Quenching baths whispered different fates. Their rituals read like code: fold, soak, cool, temper, executed in loops until edge and spine learned opposite lessons. One to bite, one to bend. What we're told is sober and right. Control the carbon, control the cooling, and you can reproduce Damascus performance. Where sources vanished or rich in trace elements, forests for charcoal, trade routes for crucible clay, the industry thinned. The canon insists rarity is logistics, not magic, and yet modern replicators, brilliant and well-equipped, often chase a ghost. Some match the look, others the performance, few both on command. It is as if the recipe lived partly in hands, partly in the gossip of furnaces and seasons. Consider meteoritic iron in royal tombs, metal from a sky fire hammered into daggers. Nickel hardens myth into metallurgy. The blade becomes a relic of catastrophe, a message that kings kept time with stars. Then return to terrestrial steel and realize that the wonder lies not only in ore, but in the social machine surrounding it, masters, apprentices, and secrets traded like coin. The mystery lens sees a guild algorithm, tacit steps that never met parchment, conditional rules spoken at the forge. If the sound is dull, feed the charcoal. If the scale peels early, cool the fire. War, famine, and conquest erase such code quickly. When the teachers vanish, the pattern fades, leaving copies that mimic surface more than soul. A blade houses more than an edge. It carries a continuity of judgment. To hold one is to feel time compressed into a line, the echo of rehearsed decisions hardened into martensite and tempered back to humility. From here, the path bends toward alloys and pigments that act like early nanotech, materials tuned to sing, glow, and gild as though matter itself remembered instructions for a while. Begin with a shard of Egyptian blue resting quiet until light touches it. Then it sings beyond sight. Ground fine, the pigment releases near-infrared like a disciplined breath, its lattice of copper and silica storing and returning energy predictably. This is property as intention, color that doubles as signal, stable through centuries of heat, salt, and handling. A workshop once knew firing windows, cooling schedules, and ratios that made the lattice behave. Turn to bronze mirrors polished until faces bloom with clarity and quiet steadiness. Alloying is choreography, tin for hardness, copper for ductility, trace elements nudging grain. Polished patiently, the surface rivals steel, and in certain traditions, magic mirrors project patterns when sun strikes them, micro-reliefs born from casting stresses. What looks mystical is microstructure performing in public. Mercury gilding adds another note, gold leaf amalgamated with quicksilver brushed on, then driven by heat until the mercury departs and a coat of gold fuses to the substrate. Toxic, yes, controlled. Craftsmen learn to balance temperature, time, and ventilation, leaving leaf that clings through weather. The result is not paint, but a thin metallic skin. Now lift a piece of ancient glass that flashes with trapped metallic glints. Colloids suspended in silica turn the bulk into a tuned filter, scattering some wavelengths, passing others, early plasmonics by accident. Recipes speak in the language of sand sources, plant ash, furnace breath, and patience. What we're told is tidy. Empirical craft refined slowly from trial and error. What we find feels like a research culture without paperwork. Observe, tweak, stabilize, and pass along through guarded instruction. Properties first thinking saturates the record, self-healing mortars, emissive pigments, alloys that remember stresses. If manuals once existed, they likely lived in heads and hearths, vulnerable to conquest and quiet forgetting. The contrast is not science versus superstition. It is different architectures of knowing. Their laboratories were kilns, benches, and seasons. Their data were colors, rings, and sounds. They built devices out of matter's temperament, not equations alone. From this chemistry of intention, we step toward information itself, counting, encoding, and computation without a shard of silicon. Across the Andes, cords once carried a government on their backs. A quipu is a spine of fiber with pendant strings, each strand dyed, twisted, and knotted with intention. Colors map categories. Positions mark hierarchy. Knots encode quantities by place value. Long knots, singles, and figure eights separate tens from hundreds. Spacing divides households from provinces. The result is compression you can touch, numbers and classes living in a braided tree. Mainstream scholarship frames Quipus as accounting. Census rolls, tribute, and labor obligations tallied in bundles. This view honors the empire's needs and the specialists who served them. The Kipuka Mayuk, trained readers who kept the chords consistent across mountains. Skeptics note that few Quipus link cleanly to narrative. Without a bilingual key, claims of stories risk romance more than proof. Yet consider logistics at altitude. Llamas move faster than scribes over ridgelines. A portable database survives rain, mud, and weeks of travel. Governors can audit with fingers, reading inventory blind. When a village fails its quota, knots tell where, when, and by how much, enabling just-in-time redistribution before scarcity hardens into revolt. This is information technology without ink. Hierarchical indexing, error checking through redundancy, and version control when chords are appended rather than replaced. A deeper mystery lingers in patterns that look like metadata. Twist direction, S or Z, varies systematically. Fiber choice and attachment styles seem to tag provenance or authority. Some Quipus align with calendrical cycles. Others mirror spatial plans as if chords could also map. If narrative lived here, it may have been structured. Names as codes, events as patterned inserts, speech compressed into schema and read aloud by trained hands. What we're told is practical bookkeeping. What we find acts like abstraction, taking messy life and pinning it to consistent form. The Quipus proves that technology can be conceptual and still leave calluses, that computation can be rhythmic, communal, and done by hand. When a state trusts chords more than parchment, it invests in memory that marches. From these tactile ledgers, we turn to scripts that refuse to yield their key. Symbols standing ready like locked doors, the message intact, the reader absent. Across the Indus plain, thousands of seals carry tiny signs, lines, loops, tridents, fish, hills. They look orderly, repeat in patterns, and yet they will not speak. On Rapa Nui, wooden tablets bear rongo-rongo, flowing glyphs read in alternating directions like a river that turns back on itself. Elsewhere, inscriptions glance at us from stones and bones, silent. They are not blank, we are. Historians warn that absence of a bilingual key limits decoding. Without a Rosetta, frequency charts and sign orders skate on thin ice. Some systems might be proto-writing, mnemonic aids rather than full script. Others could be specialized notations, tallies, star cycles, ritual cues, inventories, or lineage markers. Function can resist prose and meaning can hide inside procedure. The mystery lens widens the frame. Suppose a culture values speech, performance, and trained memory over long texts. Suppose information lives in guilds and liturgies and the script only scaffolds the act. You could get symbols that trigger knowledge in initiates yet look opaque to strangers. A calendar staff that cues festivals. A seal that compresses a merchant's identity and contract terms. A tablet that encodes chant structure more than storyline. The technology is not the glyphs alone, but the institution that trains, rehearses, and audits them. Notice the telltales: consistent sign lengths, positional rules, clustering around thresholds of recall. Some sequences travel with trade goods, others stay home, guarding land and water rights. We find stylus ruts that suggest habitual stroke order. We find erasures shaped like policy. None of this proves narrative. It proves system. What we're told is caution. Do not project novels onto ledgers or prayers. What we find is a spectrum where utility outruns exposition. Knowledge can persist as code without commentary, like a hard drive waiting for a driver. The message survives. The interface is gone. If the evidence is this scattered, what broke the chain? Conquest, plague, iconoclasm, and fashion sweep readers away. Scripts that refuse to speak may simply be scripts that lost their schools. Fluency dies. Artifacts remain behind. The signs endure, carrying a promise forward until someone learns how to ask them again. The record of genius does not die politely, it chokes. A library burns and the air tastes of glue. A workshop empties in a night and the forge cools like a heart refusing. Masters flee or fall. Apprentices scatter, trade routes clot with panic when a plague redraws the map. In the rubble, artifacts endure while explanations evaporate, and we misread survivors as miracles because their families are dead. Mainstream history prefers continuity with adaptation. Techniques migrate, guilds rebuild, methods bend. Often true, yet the past also breaks like a bone, healing crooked or not at all. Climate shocks starve charcoal forests. Mines flood and seal special ores. Ports change allegiance and customs walls rise. What looks like smooth progress can be punctuated equilibrium jumps and stalls where entire recipe books vanish between paragraphs. Picture one toolkit as a life, a hammerhead dark with oil, tongs tuned to a favorite grip, jigs that hold angles by memory. A father teaches a son the sound of proper heat. A daughter learns when a blade asks for carbon by the color on its skin. Flood, war, or decree snaps the thread. The chest is sold, scattered, or buried against a return that never comes. A branch leaves the tree of skill, and generations later we puzzle over an edge pattern, a pigment's glow, a masonry joint that refuses daylight. Fire is not the only eraser. Salt grinds mortar, worms and damp unright scrolls, new rulers salt fields and stories alike. Silence grows inside institutions when fear outlives its cause. Once vital rites shrink to theater, gestures without understanding. An artisan's death can be louder than a conquest if she carried the last intact map of a method. This is why isolated wonders sit in the record like UFOs. Context erased, supply chains gone, the ordinary scaffolding that made the extraordinary repeatable stripped away. A lone artifact cannot confess its workshop. It can only persist, stubborn and mute, while we argue about meaning and motive, listening for hands that no longer answer. That silence is history's loudest verdict on fragility itself. Not every silence is catastrophe. Some are policy. Knowledge can be fenced like pasture, parceled to those who swear oaths. Guilds monopolize tools, measurements, markets. Temples lock recipes behind liturgy. Courts classify crafts as state security. Black boxes multiply wherever advantage is scarce. A technique becomes a coin and secrecy the mint. Protective tradition has virtues. Standards keep bridges standing and blades from shattering. Apprenticeship preserves tacit steps that paper cannot catch. A closed circle can protect the public from quacks. But protection curdles into suppression when access is controlled for rent rather than excellence. Newcomers become threats. Curiosity becomes crime. Heresy is rebranded as incompetence. States play their own game. Empires conscript engineers, sequester map rooms, nationalize mines, and criminalize export of skilled hands. A ruler who fears rivals mandates ritual explanations for practical methods, burying function beneath sanctity. Priests bless the furnace. Scribes write euphemisms. Penalties teach obedience. Taboo serves as firewall when law is brittle or distant. Markets also govern disclosure. When margins thin, a shop hoards its advantage. When demand explodes, workshops license methods and standards emerge. War accelerates both. Diffusion for survival, secrecy for weapons. After victory, peacetime forgets and archives close. The pendulum is predictable. Open, close, repeat. This is the mundane face of forbidden history. Conspiracies exist, but more often we meet incentives managing scarcity. What looks like deliberate erasure may be attrition, retirement without heirs, a ledger lost to dampness, a recipe guarded to death. Add conquest or iconoclasm and the gate becomes a tomb. Contrast frames the stakes. Protective tradition hands down a violin. Suppression locks the instrument in a case and hides the key. One nurtures continuity, the other embalms it. The difference is not mystery versus science, but power's posture toward knowledge, stewardship, or hoarding. With chains broken and gatekeepers gone, what do the scattered clues demand of us now? To test without scoffing, to credit without worship, to rebuild lineages from remnants, and to design institutions that remember by sharing. the past hoarded. Perhaps our only honest tribute is to open the window. The tools we met were not mistakes out of time. They were fluent answers to specific constraints. Stone remembered intention as if it held a script, joints so tight they rehearsed until the air could not participate. Pigments behaved like sensors, storing light and releasing it on cue. Roads organized empires the way operating systems organize code, updates, maintenance, failure. Knots condensed households, fields, and labor into graspable patterns, a database woven for hands rather than screens. In each case, technology looked less like gadgets and more like disciplined thinking poured into matter. Seen that way, ancient intelligence stops looking misplaced and starts looking adapted. We were taught to climb a ladder called progress, yet the record insists on rivers. Streams flare, merge, and vanish. A workshop closes and the current splits. A guild migrates and technique learns an accent. When we label exceptions anachronisms, we flatten that braided landscape into a staircase and scold missing steps. Judge past minds by outcomes within their constraints. Could they predict eclipses? Move improbable weights? Stabilize mixtures that modern recipes still chase? If yes, the measure is not our toolkits but their results under pressure. This shift replaces condescension with kinship. A jig becomes a machine, a ritual, a protocol, a recipe, a lab notebook sung aloud. Secrecy reads less like superstition and more like governance over advantages. In that light, mystery sharpens. We stop asking whether people were like us and start asking how they were like themselves, and what solutions worlds made inevitable. Respect follows naturally when performance speaks. Humility is not retreat, it is equipment. It lets us carry two truths without breaking. Wonder deserves a seat, and so does measurement. When both travel together, stones speak and scripts flicker with purpose. The aim is neither to crown a vanished golden age nor to defend a monotone modernity. It is to recognize a pattern we were not trained to see. Intelligence as a recurring climate, not a single storm condensing wherever culture, need, and time make the air right. From here, the next questions write themselves and the search continues with steadier hands. We have arrived at the edge where answers thin and responsibilities grow. What else are we misclassifying because our categories are provincial? Which miracles are only unfamiliar methods asking for patient replication? If stone can remember, if pigment can answer, if roads can compute, how many other instruments are hiding in plain ritual, or written off as decor because we forgot the verbs they require? Perhaps the next discovery is not a treasure, but a workflow, not a relic, but a rehearsal we learn to perform. So the invitation is simple. Support digs that document, not just dazzle. Fund labs that retest old claims with better controls. Value crafts that transmit tacit steps and pay attention when hands disagree with theories. Preserve sites before they are paved or looted. Record tool marks before rain edits them. Ask elders about techniques they carry without bookkeeping words. Treat replication as respect, not challenge. Where you can, resist the appetite for certainty that erases the middle distance between legend and manual. Some stories will contract under scrutiny. Let them. Others will expand, gaining detail and credibility until they anchor the timeline differently. We do not need capes for every accomplishment, nor contempt for any that do not wear our badge. We need steadiness, curiosity fastened to method, skepticism warm enough to listen. And we need patience, because knowledge returns on its own schedule, following the contours of attention and care. I picture a quiet, empty workshop, its roof patched, its hearth asleep. Dawn leans through the door and finds a bench scarred by long practice. Motes rise and drift like small stars. On a shelf sit a lens, a cord, and a shard of blue that hums when light touches it. None of them speak. None of them need to. They are invitations, not artifacts, and the key to them is not hidden in the past, but forged in our choices now. The past is not behind us. It is a library with many locked rooms. Every new key we learn to make changes the catalog, and with it, the map of who we are.